10 years ago when I first went into politics, Pritam had breakfast with me at this noodles place in the East Coast. And he said, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if you wanted to join the Workers' Party. And I said, no.
Welcome to another episode of The Real Deal. Today I'm here with Dr. Paul Tambyah. You are a doctor in infectious diseases. You're a politician in Singapore. You're outspoken and people know you. And today we're going to try to understand more about the man behind what we see every 5 years online. My first question for you today would be, why did you choose to go into medicine and why infectious diseases of all things?
Well, it's actually a very long story. It begins when I was a kid. My father was an endocrinologist, that's a diabetes and thyroid specialist. And my dad was actually very well loved and well respected in the community. I wanted to be like him, like a lot of people want to be like their parents. But I was interested in a lot of things. I was interested in history, I was interested in writing, and I was interested in science. And 30 years ago, one of the hot things in science was X-ray crystallography. So I was very interested in it, and I was quite interested in how physics and kind of biology interacted. But what really made up my mind was my dad invited Professor David Pike. At that time, he was the president of the Royal College of Physicians home for a meal. And when you go to someone's house, you always ask their kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? So he asked me, what do I want to do when I grow up? So I said, well, it's a choice between medicine and crystallography. And he said, oh, that's very simple. He said, if you like people, you do medicine. You like crystals, you do crystallography.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bit of an oversimplification, but that's what eventually led me to decide to choose medicine as a career. And I'm really glad I did, because now with AI, crystallography is totally dead.
Yeah. You foresaw it 3 decades ago. Yeah.
As a 17-year-old.
Yeah. No, so you were 17 when that conversation happened. Even at that age, you already knew that, you liked working with people.
I did. I liked working with people, and I also liked the science of it. In fact, that's what I really enjoy most about medicine is actually working and interacting with people.
Amazing. Wow. Why the specialty of infectious diseases? Why not something else?
My first posting back in hospital was in cardiology. And the head of cardiology at that time was Professor Maurice Chu, who's one of the leaders of Farrer Park Hospital. So he said to me, would you like to do cardiology as a career? Then I said to him, there are too few diagnoses. You either have heart failure, you have a heart attack, or you have a heart rhythm problem. And then he said to me, well, in that case, you should do infectious disease. He said, there are thousands of diagnoses. It could be a virus, it could be a bacteria, it could be a fungus, it could be a parasite. And, he was trying to be funny. But I went home and I thought about it. I thought, hey, that's exactly why I went into medicine in the first place, is to try and be a detective.
Where did this desire to be a detective come from?
Well, when I was a kid, I loved detective novels.
Right.
And I graduated. I moved up from like the Hardy Boys, to Agatha Christie and G.K. Chesterton, Father Brown, and all these detectives. And of course, the greatest of them was Arthur Conan Doyle.
Sherlock Holmes.
A lot of people don't realize this, but Conan Doyle was actually a doctor. He looked at the data, he looked at all the clues, looked at the patients, interviewed them, talked to them, tried to see whether they really got better or they did not. And that's the kind of stuff that went into the Sherlock Holmes stories. If you've ever watched the TV show House, his famous line is "Everyone lies." Okay, and it's not entirely true, but the reality is people don't tell you things about themselves, especially about their most intimate details.
And that's important for the diagnosis?
Yeah, they don't tell it to you until they trust you. And that's really, really important.
So is your point that even when it comes to a medical diagnosis, it's still about the human behind that?
It is totally about the human behind them. I tell my students who are so worried about not having jobs if AI chatbots come in and take their place, there is still that element, the human element, which I think is going to be very, very hard to replace by an AI chatbot.
Earlier on, you brought up the fact that you enjoy mysteries and used to read a lot of Sherlock and detective novels like that. So I have a few case files here for you.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, really. So I'm going to put this on the table and I'll leave you to choose which one you want to answer first. Would you tell me what you think about each of these issues and who the culprits are and what can be done to solve these cases?
Okay, the first question obviously is the hardest. And it goes, how do you feel about our current immigration policies, taking into account the fact that we also have a declining birth rate? So I think that our immigration policies are overly focused on short term economic gains. Because the reality is, we've seen this time and time again. People who come in, their parents may not be that well educated, but in the right setting, in the right environment, and Singapore has got lots of opportunities. They do really well and they make a huge contribution to Singapore. So I think this deterministic approach to immigration based on short-term views is not a good idea. If you're looking at it from a broader policy perspective, you want people who are committed to Singapore. You want people who've got friends and family here, who grew up here, who have lived here, who have children who serve our national service, to be part of the Singapore framework.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to case number two. What's your next pick?
What do you think our schools are doing well? Where are they failing students the most today? Okay, that's a really tough one. Now, my view of schools is somewhat biased because the students that I see at the university are obviously the top students. And what is really impressive is how smart they are. They are really well taught. They have access to incredible resources. They get a chance to go on overseas exchange programs. So Singaporeans actually are the world's best test takers. You look at things like the PISA system and things like that. We ace every exam that there is. I was just telling my wife, yesterday morning I did a tutorial. I do a tutorial Monday mornings for the postgraduates. And in general, the attendance is about 60-70%. Yesterday we hit 90%. I said, you know why?
What?
I was doing MCQs because they have an exam coming up in February.
Right.
So I think that is something that we have kind of failed the students in, that we have focused them on examinations. But when it comes to stepping back, thinking out of the box, being a bit different, or actually relating to somebody who is different, I think we have a long way to go. And this comes home a lot with people who are neurodivergent.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. We've got a few more cases. Let's see what else. Maybe number four over there.
Okay. So number 4, in your opinion, which areas of society in Singapore face the greatest inequality? What do you think can be done to overcome this inequality? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. The biggest difference is wealth inequality. So wealth inequality is different from income inequality in that it refers to the kind of assets that you have. The vast majority of people who have the money in Singapore are the so-called old money. These are people who live the kind of lifestyles that you see in Crazy Rich Asians. Because if you have this kind of wealth, then you're competing against somebody who maybe has comes from a single parent family, has got a bunch of siblings, doesn't even have their own desk at the office. Interestingly enough, they just gave Jack Neo a Lifetime Achievement Award, and his movie Xiao Han Pupen, one of them was artistically inclined, had trouble going through school, but ultimately found the kidnapper because he was able to draw a sketch for the police. And then of the other two, one of them came from a super privileged background with tutors and a very domineering mother. And he kind of, just muddled along. And then this other kid who had to help his parents in the stall. And that's what we call a level playing field in Singapore. See, when the three kids are competing against each other for the same standardized test. Because if this kid, the kid who's got all the resources in the world, if they can't get into a local uni, they get sent to Australia, they come back, they have a degree, they get a chance to get a good job. Whereas the kid who is helping out in his father's stall, he's got a real tough time because he has to do well in the test without the benefit of tuition. So I think that's a huge problem because it perpetuates the inequality that goes on through generations.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on all these topics. Let's talk about your politics. So, you're the chairman of the Singapore Democratic Party. Why the SDP instead of any other opposition party in Singapore?
Well, as you've probably gathered from this interview, my views are somewhat left of center. So I tend to believe that certain things are basic human rights, like healthcare, like education, like housing. And the SDP, from its beginning, has always been a party with a very clearly defined ideology. Yeah, I mean, I totally respect what the Workers' Party is doing, but I'm not so sure that it would work for me.
Mm.
10 years ago, when I first went into politics, Pritam had breakfast with me at this noodles place in the East Coast. And he said, he said, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if you wanted to join the Workers' Party. And I said, no.
You said no,
I
flat out.
said, no, flat
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
May I ask what you told him?
Yeah, and I told him, I said, look, number one, I'm not hard up to be a member of parliament. But I said that I went into politics primarily because I was not happy with certain things. Many years ago, Goh Chok Tong told Catherine Lim, says, don't just stand there as an academic and write an essay and criticize. He says, get into politics. So I took him literally.
I'm really curious about this because, well, I'll frame it in two separate ways, okay? So, firstly, you said that you started doing this because you saw some things that you were not happy with. May I ask if it was things in your own personal life? So, for example, things that were happening to you in your life that you were not happy with? Or were you seeing something happening to other Singaporeans that you were not happy with?
Yeah, it was entirely to other Singaporeans. I'm one of the privileged in that sense, you see, but it's things that I saw in people I interacted with, and it was primarily I felt in a sense that I wasn't able to perform optimally as a physician. When you have to think about the cost of your patient's medications, or as an educator, when I'll never forget this. This is a couple of years after I got back, and they had shortened a particular course, an introductory course for the early students. They cut it down from, like, I think it was 12 weeks to 6 weeks. So I sat the students down and I said, in 6 weeks, I can either teach you how to pass the exam or how to be a good doctor. So out of the seven of them, six of them said they wanted to pass the exam. One of them said he wanted to learn how to be a good doctor. In a way is much more satisfying to teach someone to be a good doctor than how to pass the exam. But if the students want to learn how to pass the exam, I will teach them how to pass the exam because, that's the reality. We're a Singaporean, but it doesn't have to be that way. So that's kind of my thinking, is that a lot of things don't have to be this way. And in fact, in the 1960s and 70s, they were moving away from that. With the universalization of education. At that time, we had this $1 OPD that you could go to. The hospitals were all run by the government. Very lean management team. There was one matron, one supervisor. And they were very efficiently run. We had some of the world's best healthcare standards. In 1982, our life expectancy was better than the US and comparable to the UK. And that was before we restructured all the hospitals.
Mm. What do you think changed and why did it change?
Yeah, frankly, I think what happened was essentially Singapore is very well connected with the world. One of the academics talked about this, where the first Singapore lecture was given by Milton Friedman from the University of Chicago. And he said that, big government is a bad thing. So government was viewed as an obstruction, as something that was bad for the people, and corporations are viewed as good. That everything had to be privatized, it had to be left to the free market, and the government should do minimal intervention. It should provide a very basic safety net and nothing more than that. And so we moved from the democratic socialism that we had in the 60s and 70s towards a very neoliberal system where there's a strong emphasis on the market, the idea that you bring in billionaires, that they create wealth, that the wealth will trickle down to the population, which has been shown not to work anywhere in the world.
Yeah. With all these things that you do, the way you speak up, the videos that you put out during election cycles, you're at the forefront of these things. Your face is out there. Why do you care enough to do that?
Well, I think there are two parts to that. The first part is kind of this: why do I care? And that's actually probably a result of my parents and the kind of upbringing we had. Both of my parents, who were in their own different ways, very active and very concerned about social issues. So they impressed on us right from the very beginning. The fact that we were in a relatively privileged position came as a result of the sacrifices of people around us. So we kind of had an obligation to give back. And in 1983, they made the merit scholars go through this program at what they called at that time the NATI, the National Youth Leadership Training Institute. And I remember they took us in an afternoon to Chinatown. And at that time, in a room this size, you would have 8 people, and there'd be somebody living upstairs in the bunk and somebody living downstairs. And these old men, and all they would do is, they would sleep, they would go down to the coffee shop, or they would do really menial tasks, you see. And the director told us, these are the people who are paying your salary, your scholarship.
Wow. Taxpayers.
Taxpayers, yeah.
Yeah.
He said they pay for their cigarettes. The cigarette tax is going towards your scholarship. Coming from the background that I did, it really made an impact. See, recognizing that this poor old guy, who's bent over, he's the one who's paying for my school fees, so to speak.
Yeah. You brought up your parents, your mom,
Yeah.
Liana Tambaya, she started what is now called AWA, Singapore's first school for children with multiple disabilities. Was it sort of subconscious where you sort of noticed it and that was ingrained in you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of natural
Right.
because people see what you do rather than what you say.
Mm.
So they didn't really have to tell us anything. And my mom, of course, was a big advocate for disabled people. So she founded the AWA school because at that time there were schools for people who were intellectually disabled and there were those who were physically disabled. But those who had both, they had nowhere to go. She got us involved right from the very beginning. My sister used to go there to help out with hydrotherapy because she liked going into the pool. And it was amazing. You see these kids with very severe muscle deformities. When they go into the water, all of a sudden they become lighter, and they're able to move, and they really enjoyed it. And the thing that really sticks in my mind is there was one year she asked us to go for the school concert. And you see these kids, some of them are so disabled, they can just barely lift a hand or they can, mouth a few words. And they were there, and the teachers were really putting in so much effort to get them to put up a concert. And the parents were out there, they were taking photos of their kids. And it was just really, really touching because these are kids who, the rest of society just writes off. But she was so proud of them and their achievements. So it um, emphasized the worth of the individual.
You still work in NUS. Currently, am I right to say that you're still a senior consultant there?
Right.
The senior consultant, you're still a professor there, you still teach students that go through the system, and yet you are so outspoken, especially during election cycles. So the question would be, does that bring about any awkwardness or discomfort in your professional life at any points?
Oh, a huge amount. There's a
Really?
huge amount of awkwardness and discomfort
Yeah.
because, as a public institution, they have an image to guard and they have certain duties and responsibilities to the paymasters. And I totally understand that. So the idea is that, if you want to say something, then you have to make it explicitly clear you're saying it in your own capacity. And to their credit, they let me say things in my own capacity. The thing about Singapore, the famous term that was popularized was OB markers.
Mhm.
And the trouble is the OB markers are not spelt out. So what some people do is they push, 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 and then you realize, okay, I hit the marker, then you go back.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been my approach. But there's always the risk of an overlap. And so in that kind of situation, you have to negotiate the boundary. And every now and again, I'll get a kind of phone call.
Yeah, really?
But to their credit, it's been relatively few.
Yeah. As a member of the opposition, you often criticize our current government for certain things, which is the point of being an opposition member. Um, Conversely, do you think that there's anything that the PAP has done very well at and continue to do well at?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that the PAP has done, again, going back to this mantra that in the days when they were a Democratic Socialist Party, you see, raising the standards of education, housing, and healthcare, that was really good. I think what the PAP has done right is this push to excellence. The idea that we want to be the best airport, the best airline, the best students. But I'm a little bit concerned because there's a lack of confidence that we are actually number one. I'll give you an illustration of this. A couple of years ago, we had a joint meeting with one of the Harvard medical schools, and they asked me to talk. And I said, it's really boring to hear me talk. I said, why don't we do a case presentation? And I said, to make it interesting, we have an unknown case, and then we have myself and two Harvard professors, and we have ChatGPT. And then we present the case as it evolves. So somebody comes in with a fever and a rash, and then what are the questions you ask, and then we see who can get the diagnosis.
Yeah. How did ChatGPT do?
ChatGPT didn't do as well, actually, interestingly enough. But this
Yeah.
was a year or two ago, and
Yeah.
it wasn't as good as it is now. But what was really interesting was after the session, two of my colleagues who are local professors, they came up to me and they said, "I could have done that." I
Mm.
said, "Of course you could have done
Mm.
that." See, but they didn't have the guts or the confidence to go up there. I was trying to find another Singaporean to come up on the panel with me, but they were kind of a little bit apprehensive or shy or whatever. See, so I think we have some of the best, academics, practitioners, um, artists, musicians, even sportsmen. Okay, even though our sportsmen have been, under siege, but we have the potential to have world beaters, and I think we just need the confidence.
To release that imposter
That's
syndrome.
right.
Yeah. With all the work that you've done, in what ways do you think that you've managed to really move the needle for Singapore?
I think it's probably in terms of healthcare policy, and I like to think of a MediShield Life. In fact, the SDP healthcare plan is actually more like MediShield Life for all, or MediShield Life on steroids, where we actually have a compulsory healthcare insurance scheme that works. I'm known for work on respiratory viruses, but my real research interest is in urine infections. But the sad reality is nobody cares
It's
about
not as
urine
sexy
infections.
as
It's
like
not sexy at all.
yeah.
In fact, when I came back from the States, I put in all these grants for urine infections and they never got funded. So my dean at the time very wisely said, "Why don't you go into flu?" And all my flu grants got funded. So I have a second career as a flu and respiratory virus researcher. But I've been trying to find somebody interested in urine infections. So far, it's been dry. So if anyone's listening to this wants to study urine infections, come and talk to me.
We'll do a call out for you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's challenging.
Yeah. We've also spoken about, or rather, we've heard about your other role model. You've mentioned Nelson Mandela, of course, a
Right.
role model in many ways. But interestingly, you said that the thing you respect about him is that he knew when to step down. When do you think it'll be time for you to step down?
Well, that's very easy because the university has said they're going to stop paying us at a certain age, and what they will do is they will work out on like an adjunct kind of agreement, which is fair enough because a lot of places you find senior academics just clinging on to power, and it prevents the younger ones from coming up. So it's about 5 or 6 years depending on how the retirement age goes, and it's a matter of trying to work out what I want to do. Like I said, I don't mind keeping a clinic or something if necessary. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the public sector. It could even be in the private sector if needed.
Hmm. Do you think even if there comes a day where you're not running for election anymore, you're not part of a political party officially, do you think you'll ever stop speaking up?
I really hope I won't. But again, there's the other side of the coin, which is I hope I may not need to, because if things change, if the needle has moved, then I don't need to be so vocal bringing it up. Or when there's more people who are willing to speak up.
And the last thing that I'll ask for this conversation is, you speak up obviously because you have a vision for Singapore, this home that you love. When you close your eyes and you think of the ideal Singapore that you are working for, what does that look like?
Again, I think it's a Singapore where everybody has an equal chance. This is something my mom always talked about. She said, whether you're able bodied or disabled, you should have the chance to live life to the fullest. So many things that she fought for, like, for example, to get EduSave for children with disabilities, to get compulsory education for children with disabilities. She was part of a group that included Dennis Pua, and she brought people together. When the government felt that parents were not keen on children with disabilities coming under the Compulsory Education Act, they commissioned a study. They interviewed 3,000 parents of children with disabilities, and they showed that the vast majority wanted their children to be under the Compulsory Education Act. So that's kind of what I'm looking towards. Where people get a chance to be what they want to be, and it doesn't have to follow one particular narrow pathway. The idea that Singapore is not all just one particular way, but there are many people around the fringes who are doing really interesting things, and they are doing things on their own, without being told to do so. And that's very encouraging. And I think we should try and encourage that, and live in a society where everybody can really flourish, do what they like, and contribute and see themselves as part of a bigger whole.
Dr. Paul, thank you very much for coming by and sharing all your thoughts and insights. Can I get your number for the urinary research thing? We'll do the call out here.
No, just look me up online.